Welcome again to this bench report series on the UK Constitution. Not a written document, but a collection of sources evolving over centuries. Our fifth and final episode looks at central government.
That's right. Central government in the UK, essentially the executive branch. And crucially, it's an executive that comes from Parliament and answers to Parliament.
Where does its actual authority stem from?
Well, it's kind of twofold, really. You've got authority derived from the crown, historically, and then authority from the voters, through general elections.
And that link to Parliament means it needs its backing.
Absolutely. There's this fundamental principle, a convention, really, that the government in power must have the support, the confidence, as it's called, of the House of Commons. That's key.
So how does that structure work in practice? Who makes up the government?
Typically, government members, the ministers, they come from either the House of Commons or the House of Lords.
And they're constantly accountable.
Directly accountable to Parliament, yes. The government stays in power, basically, as long as it can keep that confidence from the Commons.
Which is where the 5-year election cycle comes in.
Exactly. General elections must be held at least every 5 years. It acts as a regular, you could say ultimate, check on whether the government still holds that confidence.
What happens if Parliament, specifically the Commons, decides it doesn't have confidence anymore?
Well, that's central to the government's survival. That confidence is tested formally through votes. Sometimes it's a specific motion of confidence put forward by the government itself.
Or the opposite.
Or a motion of no confidence, usually proposed by the opposition. Losing one of those is, well, usually critical.
Are there other ways confidence is tested?
Yes, major parliamentary events like the big debate on the King's Speech at the start of a session, that's traditionally seen as a confidence issue too. Failing to get your legislative program approved is a bad sign.
And what about when there isn't a clear majority? Minority governments or coalitions?
Good point. In those situations, things can be a bit more explicit. The Prime Minister might actually state outright which specific votes or pieces of legislation will be treated as matters of confidence. It clarifies the stakes,
Makes sense. It sounds like keeping that confidence is paramount.
It really is. And there's a convention tied to this. The government is expected to always allow the leader of the opposition parliamentary time, usually a specific day, to debate a motion challenging the government's confidence if they request it.
And if the government does lose a major confidence vote?
The usual outcome, the constitutional expectation, is a general election. It throws the question back to the electorate.
Okay, so that's how a government might fall. What about the run-up to a scheduled election? Does anything change?
Yes, things shift a gear. Towards the end of a parliamentary term, the civil service actually starts making preliminary contact with the main opposition parties.
To prepare for a potential change.
Exactly. To ensure a smooth transition if there's a change of government. It's about preparedness.
Does the current government slow down its activities?
Generally, yes. During this pre-election period, the incumbent government typically avoids launching major new long-term projects or initiatives. Essential day-to-day business carries on, of course.
But no big new policies?
Not usually. Also, the governing party is allowed to check specific facts and policy details with government departments related to their public statements, ensuring consistency.
And this applies elsewhere, too.
Similar restrictions, though sometimes a bit more limited, are usually in place during election periods for the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and for local council elections, too. It maintains a level playing field, sort of.
Let's zoom in on the Prime Minister. A central figure, obviously, but what's their formal role?
It's interesting. The PM actually has relatively few specific legal duties assigned directly to them in statute. But in practice, they take the lead on all major national issues.
So where did their power come from?
A lot comes from convention and what are called prerogative powers. Powers historically held by the crown, but now exercised by ministers, mainly the PM.
Like appointing ministers?
Precisely. Recommending who should be appointed as government ministers, deciding the overall structure of the cabinet, setting up its various committees, that's the PM's domain. The ministerial code explicitly states the PM is responsible for the overall organization of the executive.
And where do they physically operate from?
Well, the office of the Prime Minister is in a separate department. Administratively, it's part of the Cabinet Office.
How is the Prime Minister held accountable day to day? We hear a lot about PMQs.
Yes. Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons every week is a very visible, very direct form of accountability. It's quite unique, actually.
Any other formal checks?
The House of Commons Liaison Committee, which is made up of the chairs of the other select committees, also questions the prime minister regularly, usually a few times a year, often on broader policy themes.
Are there traditional speaking roles?
There are. By long-standing tradition, the Prime Minister gives a major speech each year at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London, often outlining foreign policy or economic strategy.
And sometimes they speak directly to the public.
Yes, on significant national occasions or during crises, the Prime Minister may make direct broadcasts to the nation.
You mentioned the PM organizes the executive. Does that include the civil service?
It does. The Prime Minister also holds the title of Minister for the Civil Service and has overall responsibility for its management and values.
And national security.
Very much so. The PM is the minister formally in charge of national security and the UK's intelligence agencies, SIS, MI6, the Security Service, MI5, and GCHQ.
Do the agency heads report directly?
The heads of those agencies provide annual reports directly to the Prime Minister, and the PM nominates the MPs and peers who sit on the Statutory Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, the ISC, which oversees the agencies.
It's a huge range of responsibilities.
It is, and there's one responsibility that's completely unique and, frankly, quite sobering.
What's that?
The Prime Minister writes the letters of last resort. These are handwritten instructions for the commanders of the UK's nuclear-armed submarines, outlining what action to take if the UK has suffered a catastrophic nuclear attack and government command structures have been destroyed.
Wow, that's quite something.
Indeed. And one more point on powers as First Lord of the Treasury, which is another traditional title held by the PM. They are one of the senior ministers who can authorize the making of emergency regulations under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004.
So significant emergency powers, too. Now, what about the other ministers of the Crown?
Well, ministers are typically members of either the House of Commons or the House of Lords. That link back to Parliament is crucial.
Do they have to give up other jobs?
Yes, when appointed, the expectation is that they resign from any other public appointments they might hold.
And they get government support?
They receive government resources, staff, offices, support for their official duties. Importantly, these resources generally shouldn't be used for party political activities or constituency work. There's a line there.
We often hear the title Secretary of State. What does that signify?
Secretary of State is a significant title, usually indicating the head of a major government department. Legally, most secretaries of state are structured as corporations sole.
What does corporation sole mean?
It basically means the office itself exists as a separate legal entity, distinct from the person holding it at any given time. It allows for legal continuity, contracts, property ownership in the name of the office, not the individual.
Okay, let's talk about the cabinet. How does that fit in?
The cabinet is really the core decision-making body of the government. Like so much in the UK system, it's primarily established by long-standing convention, not specific law.
So its main job is discussion and decision.
Exactly. It provides the forum for ministers, usually the most senior ones led by the PM, to collectively discuss and decide on government policies and strategy. A famous historical report described it as the mainspring of the mechanism of government.
Is there a formal record kept?
Yes. The Cabinet Secretariat, part of the Cabinet Office, keeps minutes of cabinet meetings. These minutes form the official record of decisions made.
I've heard about collective responsibility. What's that?
That's a vital principle. It means that once the cabinet reaches a decision, all ministers, even those who might have argued against it privately during the discussion, must publicly support that decision. They have to present a united front.
So disagreements stay behind closed doors.
That's the idea. Resignation is the expected course if a minister feels they cannot publicly support a major government policy decided by cabinet.
Is information about those discussions protected?
Generally, yes. Information relating to policy development, internal ministerial communications, legal advice provided by government lawyers, and the internal workings of ministers' private offices, these are often exempt from disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 to allow for frank discussion.
Does the cabinet ever discuss purely party politics?
The Prime Minister can convene what are sometimes called political cabinets. These meetings are specifically for discussing party political matters. Crucially, officials don't attend, and no official minutes are taken.
And what's key OBR? We hear that mentioned during emergencies.
COBR, it stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Rooms, though it's really more of a system or process, is the mechanism used to coordinate the central government's response during major emergencies or crises. It brings together relevant ministers, officials, and agency heads.
Moving on, what about the Privy Council? It sounds quite historical.
It is very historical. The Privy Council consists of individuals, lords, and others appointed by the monarch to be their advisors. In practice today, it mainly exercises powers granted to it by acts of parliament.
So it have a legislative function.
Of a sort. Certain types of legislation, known as orders in council, are formally made through the Privy Council. Membership is for life and includes current and former senior politicians, judges, and others.
Who runs the meetings?
The Lord President of the Council usually chairs its meetings. This is typically a senior cabinet minister, often holding another role like Leader of the House of Commons or House of Lords. The Privy Council Office, or PCO, provides administrative support.
Now, the civil service, we've mentioned it supports the government. What's its constitutional position?
The civil service is the permanent, non-political body that supports the government of the day, regardless of its political color, helping to develop and implement policies and deliver public services.
Does it have its own legal identity?
Not really. There's a key legal idea called the Carl-Tone principle. It essentially establishes that the actions of civil servants are legally considered the actions of their minister. The civil service doesn't have a separate constitutional personality from the government it serves.
Who are civil servants loyal to?
Constitutionally, civil servants owe their duty of loyalty to the Crown. However, the Crown acts on the advice of ministers, and those ministers are accountable to Parliament. So, in practice, their duty is to serve the duly constituted government.
How are they recruited? Is it political?
No, a cornerstone is impartiality. The Civil Service Commission is a statutory, independent body that regulates recruitment into the civil service, ensuring appointments are made based on fair and open competition and the principle of selection on merit.
Who manages the civil service overall?
As we mentioned, the Minister for the Civil Service, usually the Prime Minister, has the statutory authority to manage the civil service. They are required to publish a civil service code, which outlines the core values: integrity, honesty, objectivity, and impartiality.
And within each department?
The permanent secretary is the most senior civil servant within a government department. They lead the department and are accountable for its management and efficiency, working closely with the ministerial team.
Finally, let's touch on His Majesty's opposition. What role do they play in this structure?
The opposition plays a absolutely critical role. Its main function is to scrutinize the government's actions, challenge its policies, and present an alternative government in waiting.
Is there a formal leader of the opposition?
Yes. The Speaker of the House of Commons, or the Lord Speaker in the House of Lords, formally recognizes the leader of the largest party, not in government, as the leader of the opposition. They even receive an additional salary for that role.
Do opposition parties get any support to do this job?
They do. Opposition parties receive public funding, known as short money in the Commons and Cranbourne money in the Lords, specifically to help them with their parliamentary duties, research, and policy development costs. It helps level the playing field somewhat.
Any other traditions associated with the opposition leader?
By convention, new leaders of the main opposition party in the Commons are usually appointed members of the Privy Council. This allows them to receive confidential briefings on national security matters when necessary. They're also normally granted a formal audience with the monarch upon taking up the role.
So that gives us a pretty comprehensive overview of central government within the UK's constitutional framework. It's a complex interplay.
It really is. We've covered the relationship between the executive, the government, and Parliament, the key roles played by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and also the vital functions of the permanent civil service and the official opposition.
And that core idea that the government is fundamentally an executive drawn from and accountable to Parliament seems to run through almost everything we've discussed.
Precisely. That's the bedrock principle underpinning how central power operates in the UK system. Hopefully, this series has given you a solid foundation for understanding these enduring elements.
Thanks for listening to our series on the UK Constitution. Take care.
Hello there, this is Tom, the producer of The Bench Report. Listener suggestions are vital to my mission of making politics more accessible and accountable. So, if you have an issue that's really important to you, personally or professionally, and want to know what those in power are doing about it, please get in touch via email or via our socials at Bench Report UK. I'll grab another coffee and start scanning those parliamentary archives.